Hello, and welcome back to our Lifelong Learning Series. My name is Anna McCoy, and I'm the Family and Consumer Sciences Agent for Fulton County. On today's episode, we will be discussing Addiction 101. So let's get started. Addiction 101, a basic guide to addiction and recovery. The introductory activity is, I want to know what you think, what is addiction? What causes someone to become addicted? And why don't people just stop using drugs when it begins to cause problems in their lives? Addiction is complicated. As a result, people tend to have varying ideas and beliefs about addiction. What do you understand about addiction? Definition of addiction. A chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking, continued use despite harmful consequences, and long-lasting changes in the brain. The American Society of Addiction Medicine defines addiction as a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. In other words, addiction is really a brain problem. Just like heart disease involves dysfunction in the heart, addiction involves dysfunction in the brain. There are a few important terms to unpack from this definition. First, at its core, addiction is a brain disorder. It is the dysfunction in the brain that leads to the drug-seeking and drug-using behaviors that we usually associate with drug addiction. Second, addiction is a chronic disorder. Similar to other chronic disorders like asthma or heart disease, there is no known cure for addiction. Since it is considered incurable, addiction must be managed long-term. So next, we're going to do a little game, fact or fiction. First one, most people who get addicted are poor. This is false. Addiction affects people from all socioeconomic backgrounds. Addiction does not discriminate. Most people who get addicted will recover. This is true, though it may be surprising. The truth is that addiction is considered a good prognosis disorder. In other words, most people who get addicted will eventually recover, though it may take multiple episodes of treatment. Addiction is a disease. This is true. This is a fact. A disease is an abnormal condition that negatively affects the structure or function of part or of all of an organism. Addiction fits into the definition, and that is why the American Medical Association classifies addiction as a disease. Addiction is a choice. False. While people do make choices that may contribute to their likelihood of becoming addicted, the majority of the risk factors for addiction are beyond a person's control. Detoxing or getting drugs out of a person's system is enough to recover. This is false. Addiction is a chronic disease. Detox is often just the first step of the lifelong road to recovery. And last one, relapse is a part of recovery. Fact or fiction? This is actually a trick question. This is actually true and false. Relapse doesn't have to be a part of recovery. Some people will recover on the first attempt to quit. However, for many people, relapse is a normal part of the recovery, and they will require multiple quit attempts. Because so many of us do not have a solid understanding of drug addiction, there are many myths that surround drug addiction. Sometimes it can be difficult to distinguish fact from fiction. Unfortunately, many of the myths surrounding addiction are harmful to people who are addicted because they spread harmful misinformation. How does the addiction develop in the brain? These risks and protective factors predispose people to certain reaction or experiences with drug and alcohol. Though most people will drink alcohol and typically enjoy the effects, they all seem to moderate their drinking with little effort. In contrast, people who have a high risk for developing an addiction tend to experience a greater sense of reward and or relief when they drink alcohol or use drugs. As a result, they are more motivated to continue pursuing substances. Repeated drug and alcohol use hijacks the brain's reward system. More specifically, this hijacking occurs in a region of the brain called the limbic system. The limbic system is also called the survival circuitry because it is part of the brain where behaviors that promote survival, like drinking water, eating food, sex, etc., are rewarded. Because it is survival circuitry that becomes hijacked, people become convinced that they need a drug to survive. This explains why people continue to use drugs despite harmful consequences such as a job loss or legal trouble. Because addiction is a brain disorder with such complexity, many people misunderstand the addiction. Often, the misunderstanding leads people to perpetuate myths that can be harmful to people who are addicted. One of the most common of these myths is the notion that people choose addiction or that people can simply will themselves to quit. Since our ability to make choices or to use willpower resides in our brain, and since addiction is a disorder of the brain, people who are addicted are, by definition, unable to make willful choices concerning drug use. Identify major risk factors for addiction. Research tells us that there is no one single reason why people become addicted. In fact, there are a multitude of factors that can either promote or prevent an addiction. Factors that make it more likely that a person will become addicted are called risk factors. In contrast, factors that make it less likely that a person will become addicted are called protective factors. Individual risk factors include things like experimenting with drugs at an early age, experiencing abuse or neglect, and having other mental health problems. Family risk factors include things like having a family history of drug use or experiencing family conflict, like divorce. Finally, social risk factors include things like having friends who use drugs and the media's portrayal of drug use. Individual protective factors include things like having good mental health and spirituality. Family protective factors include things like parental monitoring and recognizing children for positive behavior. Lastly, social protective factors include things like a child having a strong relationship with a non-parental adult and being involved in extracurricular activities. Having a family history of addiction or mental illness are two of the biggest risk factors for addiction. Here you will see exploring a family history. This is an example genogram. It is important that we all become familiar with our own family histories. Genograms are useful tools because they can allow us to see patterns that we may not have seen on our own. We use symbols to represent our family members. Squares represent males, circles represent females. When people are married, they are connected by a line. When they are divorced, the line has a slash. There are a great many symbols that therapists use to represent various conditions. A horizontal line represents addiction in a person. A vertical line represents mental illness in a person. Do you notice any patterns within this example genogram? How do people recover from addiction? Unfortunately, recovery from addiction is not as simple as detoxing someone or getting drugs out of their system. Remember, addiction is defined as a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by long-lasting changes in the brain. Some of these dysfunctional changes in the brain last days, others last months, and still others take years to fully recover. This is why recovery is considered a lifelong process. Many of the factors that help people recover from drug and alcohol addiction are similar to factors that help people recover from other chronic diseases like diabetes or heart disease. Common treatment approaches may include residential treatment, medication, individual counseling, and group therapy. Many people benefit from support groups as well. A critical factor to addiction recovery for many people is identifying and managing coexisting mental health conditions. Anxiety and depressive disorders are more common in addicted persons than in general population. It is important that these issues be addressed so that people in recovery can enjoy a full, healthy recovery. As with other chronic diseases, relapse is often a part of the recovery process. However, a relapse is not the same as starting back at square one. Instead, many people find that they have begun developing coping skills and strategies during previous quit attempts that they can carry forward. So up to 2 years without using for the brain to start producing dopamine to close to normal levels. After 5 years of sobriety, the chances of becoming addicted decrease back to baseline, or in other words, just as likely as someone who has never used substances before. Therefore, we may be able to assume that after 5 years, the brain is producing dopamine at close to normal levels again. Clinically, this is referred to as full remission. Substance abuse disorders are chronic disorders. Because SUDs, substance abuse disorders, are considered chronic disorders, it is imperative that they are treated as if they are like any other chronic disorder, including but not limited to diabetes, heart disease, blood pressure, etc. Because SUDs are chronic disorders, they require ongoing recovery management. People with SUDs can get better if they have access to ongoing care and resources. So, substance use disorder stigma, what it is and how can you prevent it? What stigma looks like. This happens to other people, but it wouldn't ever happen to me. No touching, hugging, or holding hands, ignoring or pretending this isn't happening to you or someone near to you. That person was raised different. I was taught better. How to support someone with a SUD. Family and friends are often the first to notice someone developing a SUD due to changes in behavior, moods, or thoughts. If your loved one has a SUD, be kind to yourself. Treatment and recovery services are out there. Spread the word. So when speaking with your loved one, it's important to act with empathy, compassion, and understanding of this medical condition. Stigma can prevent someone to openly talking about a SUD, limit or restrict a person's path to a treatment, and in some cases lead to death. Be kind to yourself, which may include therapy or self-care strategies. It can be mentally and physically difficult to help a loved one. Treatment and recovery services. Know more about resources and referrals for your loved one is ready. Spread the word. Continue to educate yourself and others about SUD to reduce stigma. So monitor your language and thoughts to reduce stigma. So someone might say, well, they are an addict. You could say this instead. My loved one has a substance use disorder, a medical condition. They are a loser. Say this instead. Many people have substance use disorder. I can help them by being there when they are ready to get the treatment they need for this medical condition. And last, you might hear someone say, well, they hurt me and I don't care. Say this instead. Many people with a substance use disorder do things they would not do if not on the brain-altering substances. It does not mean they don't care, and it means that they need my help now more than ever. You want to use your words carefully when talking with someone with SUD. Harmful words can trigger different emotions and lead to stigma. Ask if they need support, talk to them with compassion, and share your concerns. So in conclusion, recovery is a marathon, not a sprint. As we've learned today, addiction is an incredibly complex disease. There are many different risk factors for addiction and many myths surrounding it as well. However, as family members, friends, and good citizens, the more we know about addiction, the better equipped we are to be helpful to the people we care about who become addicted.
Thank you for joining today's lesson. I hope you learned something. And until next time, my name is Anna McCoy with the Fulton County Extension Office.